Welcome to the BTC University. I'm Suzi Angelina. My Instagram handle is Hair by Suzi, and I've come today from London, UK, to teach you guys my luxury blonding technique. So let's get started. So this is my lovely model. We are working with a lot of root here, and she's a very deep level 5. We've got a lot of depth to her natural roots. We've got some previous lightener through the ends here, and you'll notice there are some darker areas because she has had some low lights and some darker tint put in her hair previously as well. So we've got a lot going on here. We need to be really mindful because we want to make the hair nice and bright and light. But as we know as hairdressers, things don't always go to plan in our chair. So sometimes you're going to have a little bit of damage in the hair that we need to work around. And for sure with my model here, we have got some breakage through the top. So the technique that I'm going to be doing today, I'm going to try and lighten as much as I can whilst also monitoring the condition and making sure that I'm not drying it out, dehydrating the hair, over processing it, but still achieving a nice bright result. We have got some face framing here going on. I don't want to overlap certain areas, but I'm going to be talking you guys through how I'm going to tackle different areas with different products. I'm going to be using the Moroccan oil lightener today. This is my favourite lightener. This is a Blonde Voyage 9-level lift lightener, and I'm going to be using that with different volume oxidants depending on where we're working on the head. So you'll notice through this underneath section here, we've got a lot more strength to the hair. Through the on top area here, we've definitely got some shorter areas. So you'll notice when I separate the hair, you've got kind of flashes of lighter pieces sitting on top of the darker pieces. And what I said earlier is I feel like almost the darkness underneath is making the broken pieces on top look more noticeable. So my aim here today is to really add brightness through these deeper areas so we can really create an overall blonder feel. And hopefully that's going to help to soften the appearance of the broken areas so that she can start working on her hair care at home and getting these to the same length as these hairs down here. So I've turned my model around here and you can see we've got a definite disconnection from the underneath section here, which is actually quite nice, long, healthy, and we've got the on top here which is sitting on top. My client hasn't had her hair cut for about 6 months, so we've had a really good intense conversation about managing her condition to make sure that it's as healthy as possible. But of course, as hairdressers, our job is to make sure that our clients leave with all of their hair attached to their head. So what I'm going to be doing today is changing the formula throughout the head depending on what hair we're working on. Through the underneath I can definitely work with something a bit stronger, but through the on top we really have to be mindful of the amount of breakage we've got through that top area there. Now because my client is naturally quite deep and dark at the root, we have got a very deep 5. It's almost bordering onto a level 4 through the underneath because it's a bit darker. I'm going to be using 20 volume oxidant by Moroccan oil. This is a cream oxidant and that is 6%. I feel like this oxidant is a very happy medium because of the fact that it gives enough lift but it doesn't kind of burn out too quickly. I find sometimes when you use 30 vol, because it's quite strong, it works quite fast but it burns out quite fast so it doesn't lift as clean, whereas 20 volume is really going to help us to lift through the natural undertones in the hair. And I'm going to predict we've got quite a few warm natural undertones in there, so 20 volume is going to be perfect for that. In terms of the ends here, they're a little bit darker, so where I can, I'll pull through 20 vol. Through the mid area here, I'll start kind of stepping down to 10 volume because there's more bleach through this area. And on top here, I'm going to pull through where I can, but of course the areas are already very blonde, I'm going to be weaving out. So I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to weave out the darker areas so we're not going to be over processing all of the blonde pieces. So you'll notice through the side here, where we've got so much depth here, it almost makes a blonder piece pop more. I want to almost add some more brightness through this area so that we can give some brightness to my client's hair and to blend all of these areas in. But at the same time, I need to make sure that some of her natural colour is present through this mid area. Because she's so dark, one of the biggest issues we could face with applying bleach is that I apply too much lightener and don't leave enough depth in between. And by doing this, it means that the root's got nothing to connect into. So it's really important for me to make sure that some of this colour is still present through this mid area. My technique here, I'm going to be running the blonde nice and high. We're going to get really close to the root, but we're still looking at creating a blend near the root. So I'm going to run the product, going to tease the hair, and then I'm going to melt back down with a root melt. And what the root melt is going to do is help to create a transition point between the client's natural root and the blonde. So we're going to have bits of her natural dimension, we're going to have the natural root up here, and we're going to have a transition between the two. So it's going to create a nice seamless flow, which means that she should be able to leave her hair for around 6 months-ish. So these products here, this is the lineup that we've got today. We are using all Moroccan products. The Blonde Voyage 9 Lift Lightener is my absolute favourite when it comes to lifting the hair. It offers a beautiful amount of lift, and I think it's really good because of course you can leave it on for a bit longer or you can get it off a bit quicker, but either way it guarantees a really nice lift in the hair. And where we've got a natural base 5 root, this is going to be perfect for that. I'm going to be alternating with 2 different oxidants, so I'm going to be mixing up 2 different bowls. I'm going to have 10 volume oxidant, which is 3%, and I'm going to have 20 volume oxidant, which is 6%. And I'll show you guys as I work through what products I'm going to be using where. So I'm going to mix up 2 bowls for my products. I'm going to have lightener in both, and I'm going to have 10 volume oxidant in one, which is 3%, and I'm going to have 20 volume oxidant in the other, which is 6%. So the 10 volume oxidant is going to go on the areas that have already got some lightener through there, and they're quite light already, but they're still a bit brassy, they've got a warm tinge, and we want to give them a bit of lift. I'm going to be using the 20 volume oxidant on the areas especially more underneath where there's more depth to the hair, but all over the head I'm going to be using 20 volume near the root. So we're going to be applying 20 vol to lift these dark roots, and then I'm going to alternate the level and the strength of the oxidant depending on how much lightener my client's got in that area. So I'm going to go mix up all of my products, and I'm going to come back to show you guys the sectioning. So I've now mixed up my products. I've got my 20 and I've got my 10 vol with my lighteners. And now I'm going to be sectioning my client's hair. So with this technique, we're going to be going super high up. So it's really important for me that we aren't losing tension in the corners. So I'm going to try and make sure that the width of my section can be covered by the width of the foil. So the width of my foils is around 120 millimeters wide, so I just need to make sure that the width of my section doesn't exceed that, because otherwise we're going to lose the tension in the corners. Perfect. So I'm going to start by sectioning my client's head. So the first section I'm going to take, I followed my client's parting back to around where the crown area is. And the first section I'm going to take is just before the crown to behind my client's ears. Again, really important that we're making sure that the width of the section can be covered by the width of the foil. Now, the wider we go with the section here, the more we're kind of condensing down the width of the section through the back, which makes our lives a little bit easier. So I try to go just behind my client's ear, as you can see there. So that's my first section done. So that's my first section there, and I'm just going to repeat that on the other side. So now I'm going to be looking at the back of the head, and I'm going to work out how wide this section is. Everyone's going to have different circumferences when it comes to your section. So some clients, this will be small enough that you could just go straight in. I'm going to go through and create a middle parting through the back of the head. So I'm not going to follow the client's parting. I'm going to go through and create a middle section down to the nape of the neck. So I'm splitting the back section into 2. So that's going to leave us with what I call a hop cross bun section, which is 4 sections around the head. So I'm going to work up from the bottoms to the top around the crown area, but when I get to the top, if I feel like this section of my foil is big enough to put this into one section, I'll then combine the 2 into one section, because of course the less sections we have, the more time we save with the application. So if your client's section is small enough that you can fit it in the width of a foil, I'd go straight up and do horizontal sections through the back. But if you feel like you need to split it into 2, make sure you do so, because we need to make sure that we keep that tension nice and tight through the corners there, because we want to make sure it's nice and bright throughout the head. So I'm going to be using a board today. The board that I'm using here is Spin in Depth. The reason that I like using a board is because it really helps me to create a really even and neat application. I find that sometimes when you don't use a board, the foils can crinkle or you can lose the tension at the root. So using a board helps to give a nice even surface for us to paint onto. So the first section I'm taking, I'm going to follow the direction of my client's natural hairline around the neck here. So I try to not take my sections too thin, especially when a client has got naturally dark roots, because I find that the blonde pieces can get lost and it can create an overall duller appearance. So I want to make sure that the weave that I'm using is big enough that you can see it, but it's not too big that it's going to look chunky or stripy. So I'm going to get all of that hair into my fingers. Just going to go through, pick up a nice consistent weave. So you'll see it's fairly like 50-50 with this section here. I would say I'm not leaving out loads of depth, but I'm leaving out enough. What one's a lighter one? And what I usually like to do is just tease slightly. The underneath hairs here, because they've got baby hairs in, they're not going to tease as much, but by teasing, what it's going to do is to help create a little bit of distance and a little bit of softness with my application. I like to scrape my foil and just tuck it over my bald like this. And then the reason I like this bald is because I can then go in and tuck that back comb in behind the hair. And I apply the lightener through the mid area, and then I just paint upwards in a slight kind of W shape.